The sight of my house stopped me dead in my tracks. I dropped my grocery bags right on the driveway. My two-story colonial, once a classic beige with white trim, was now painted pitch black from the gutters to the garage door. The morning sun glinted off the glossy finish like some twisted joke. I'm Conrad Zeller, and I've lived in this neighborhood for over 12 years without a single HOA violation. That was before Priscilla Penmore got elected president of the HOA. Priscilla is the kind of woman who wears a visor indoors and talks to everyone like they're her teenage children. Her voice has the tone of a smoke alarm that won't shut off. And ever since she took over, she's been on a mission to restore aesthetic order, which apparently meant targeting houses that didn't fit her personal Pinterest board. But painting my house? Without permission. That was next level insane. I stormed over to her place, 3 houses down. Her door was already open like she'd been waiting for me. "Oh, Conrad," she said with that fake, sugary voice. "I was hoping you'd come by. Honestly, you should be thanking us. The beige was so uninspired. You painted my house black. Without my consent. That's illegal, Priscilla." She crossed her arms and tilted her head. "Actually, the HOA board voted on it. Article 12, Section 4. We have the right to modify exterior appearances to preserve uniformity. It was all very democratic. You held a meeting without informing me. You didn't check your mailbox. That's not our fault. I walked away before I said something that would land me in jail. Back home, I grabbed my binder. Yes, I keep a binder of every HOA memo, email, and notice. Years of documents, all neatly filed." I flipped to Article 12, Section 4. Her quote? Total fiction. The actual clause said the HOA can recommend exterior changes but must receive written consent from the homeowner before any alterations. She bet on me not reading the fine print. Bad bet. The next morning, I installed 2 new security cameras around my property. I had a feeling things were going to escalate. Sure enough, a week later, while reviewing footage, I saw a truck labeled Premier Paint Pros pull into my driveway. The same truck from earlier. I rewound the footage and caught the license plate. The timestamp? 2 days before the date Priscilla claimed the board voted. I printed everything. Screenshots. Emails. The real HOA bylaws. Even their forged meeting minutes that conveniently didn't have my signature. Then I filed a civil suit. When I got the court date, I made sure to send copies of the summons to every board member. I wanted them all there. Especially Priscilla. She thought painting my house black was going to humiliate me. She had no idea she just handed me the brush to paint her right into a legal corner. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No grand jury box or towering judge's bench, just a modest setup of polished tables, a tired-looking clerk, and a judge who looked like she'd seen enough HOA nonsense to last a lifetime. I sat at the petitioner's table, my binder open like a general's war map. Next to me was my attorney, Leslie Nunez. She was a former prosecutor who'd left public service to fight for civilians in property disputes. Her tone was calm, clipped, surgical. The kind of person who could dismantle a lie with a single question and make it seem like a polite misunderstanding. Across from us sat Priscilla and the board's counsel, a man who looked like he charged by the syllable. Priscilla wore a blazer that probably cost more than my mortgage payment and her signature pearl necklace like it was armor. Her expression was tight, like she was trying to hold back a sneeze that had lasted 3 days. Case 2274B, the judge announced, flipping through her docket. Zeller versus Oak Hollow Homeowners Association. Leslie stood. "Your Honor, before we begin, we'd like to submit an updated exhibit list." New evidence was collected after the initial filing. The judge raised an eyebrow. Is opposing counsel aware? Copies were delivered by courier yesterday morning. The HOA's attorney nodded, clearly not thrilled. "We received them. We object to their relevance. Overruled," said the judge without looking up. "Let's see what Mr. Zeller has brought us." Leslie laid out the progression like a storyboard. First, the side-by-side color comparisons of the house before and after. Then, the video stills, The truck's arrival, the workers unloading paint cans, the full license plate, and the timestamp. Next, the original HOA bylaws enlarged and highlighted, showing the clause requiring written homeowner consent. And finally, the so-called meeting minutes Priscilla had distributed, with signatures from 2 board members who, according to notarized affidavits, were out of state on those dates. Leslie paused. Your Honor, not only was Mr. Zeller's property altered without consent, but the documentation provided to justify that alteration was fabricated. This is not simply a dispute over aesthetics, it's a coordinated act of property tampering and falsification. Priscilla leaned toward her attorney, whispering rapidly. He stood. Your Honor, if I may, this is being blown entirely out of proportion. There was no malicious intent. The board acted in good faith to maintain neighborhood standards. The judge looked at him like he'd just tried selling sand at the beach. We're talking about falsified documents, unauthorized property alteration, and potential trespassing. This isn't a matter of taste, it's a matter of law. The court recessed for 15 minutes. Outside, I paced the hallway. My hands weren't shaking, but I could feel a tightness in my chest that had settled in the day I saw my house turned into a Gothic nightmare. Leslie finally emerged from the courtroom, adjusting her watch. The judge is calling in a compliance officer from the city. She wants a neutral third party to verify the extent of the damage and confirm whether any city ordinances were violated during the repainting. I blinked. City ordinances? Yep. Turns out Oak Hollow is inside a regulated historical district, which means any exterior changes, especially drastic ones, require a permit from the Municipal Zoning Committee. And guess who didn't file one? It took less than an hour for the city's compliance officer to show up. A wiry man with a clipboard and a laser measurer, he inspected the photos briskly. His expression didn't change until he flipped to the invoice from Premier Paint Pros. This work was done without a surface treatment plan, he muttered. No primer adherence logs, no reflective surface testing. And this shade industrial pitch? That's on the restricted list. Too high an absorption rate for summer temperatures. Violates 3 energy compliance statutes. Leslie nodded. So we're not just dealing with an aesthetics dispute. We're looking at city code violations, environmental noncompliance, and property defacement. The judge reconvened the session. I've seen enough, she said. Mr. Zeller, you will receive full reimbursement for repainting your home to its original condition using a contractor of your choosing. The HOA will be responsible for all associated costs, including material, labor, and environmental compliance certification. Priscilla's mouth twitched, but she stayed silent. Furthermore, the judge continued, based on the evidence of document falsification and unauthorized property alteration, I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. Ms. Penmore, you may want to retain separate counsel. Priscilla's attorney froze. The judge wasn't finished. The HOA board will also be audited by the city for potential misuse of funds. Until the audit is complete, all discretionary spending by the HOA is suspended. And I'm ordering a temporary oversight committee composed of non-board homeowners to supervise operations. This court will not tolerate power exercised without accountability. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Priscilla's face had gone pale. Her control, her smug little kingdom, it was collapsing under its own weight. Outside the courthouse, a few neighbors had gathered. Word had spread fast. Henry Patel from across the street clapped me on the shoulder. About time someone took them on, he said. They fined me last year for having a birdbath that wasn't architecturally consistent. I shook his hand. We're not done yet. That evening I met with a small group of residents in my garage. We'd converted it into a makeshift war room, folding chairs, a whiteboard, and a printer churning out documents. We've got a window, I told them. The court's given us temporary oversight. If we can get enough signatures, we can force a full vote to dissolve the current board and rewrite the bylaws. Tammy, a retired nurse who'd lived in the neighborhood since the early 80s, nodded. We've been waiting for this for years. We split into teams. Door-to-door petitions. Public records requests. A website to log grievances and collect testimonies. Leslie helped draft a legally sound proposal for a new governance structure, one with checks, transparency clauses, and homeowner veto rights. No more secret votes. No more unilateral decisions. 3 days later, the police showed up at Priscilla's house with a warrant. Forgery and trespassing charges. The painting company was under investigation due to unlicensed work in a regulated district. The workers had been subcontracted with no background checks. One of them had a prior conviction for property damage. By the end of the week, 2 other board members had resigned quietly. One moved out entirely. We gathered again in my garage, this time with twice as many chairs. The energy was different. Confident. Focused. This isn't just about repainting a house, I told the group. It's about making sure no one ever has to deal with this kind of abuse again. And for the first time since the black paint dried on my siding, I felt something close to peace. Not because I'd won, but because I wasn't the only one fighting anymore. By the 4th week after the court ruling, the neighborhood didn't look the same. The tension that had once hung over Oak Hollow like humidity in August had been replaced by something else: motion. People who used to avoid eye contact at the mailbox were now working together, organizing, pulling records, and talking openly. And more importantly, the veil had finally lifted on just how long the HOA had been operating without scrutiny. We were in my garage again, though now it resembled a minor campaign headquarters. Laptop cords snaked across folding tables, a giant corkboard displayed a timeline of board activity, and a few of the neighbors had even brought in coffee and snacks like it was a stakeout. There were over 24 of us now, from all walks of life: engineers, teachers, a retired firefighter, even a third-shift sanitation supervisor who made it to every meeting despite sleeping in his truck between shifts. Tammy had just come back from the county records office with a cardboard box full of hard copies. She dropped it on the table with a dull thud. "Found something?" she said, flipping through folders. Oak Hollow's HOA filed a lien on a property 3 years ago, claiming unpaid dues. But according to the ledger, that homeowner had actually paid early twice. Leslie leaned over her shoulder. "Do we have payment confirmation?" "Yep. Cleared checks, signature from the treasurer, and a bank timestamp. They still reported it as delinquent." That caught everyone's attention. "Why?" asked Henry, always quick to spot a pattern. "What's the motive there?" Tammy didn't answer. She just pulled the next folder. Then another. And another. It was the same story again and again. Residents charged fabricated fees, threatened with legal action, coerced into paying thousands just to remove illegitimate liens. One woman had lost her home entirely. Leslie exhaled slowly. "This isn't just negligence. This is fraud." I stepped back and looked around the room. "We need to bring this higher." That evening, we compiled everything and submitted it to the County Fraud Investigations Division. Leslie called in a favor to a friend of hers who worked in the Attorney General's office and flagged it for priority review. We weren't dealing with petty HOA nonsense anymore. We were looking at a coordinated scheme: financial falsification, mail fraud, and civil extortion. The next morning, 2 unmarked sedans rolled into Oak Hollow. They didn't knock on doors. They went straight to the HOA office, a converted room at the back of the clubhouse that had always been locked unless Priscilla or one of her loyalists was holding a scheduled review. The investigators entered with a warrant and walked out 2 hours later carrying 4 desktop towers, 6 file boxes, and what looked like the board's internal server. That afternoon, a formal statement was released from the Attorney General's office confirming an investigation into financial misconduct and falsified lien practices within the Oak Hollow Homeowners Association. The local news picked it up. By sundown, reporters were parked on the curb outside Priscilla's house. She didn't answer the door. 2 days later, she was arrested. It wasn't dramatic. No handcuffs on the lawn. No shouting. But it was public. 2 sheriff's deputies walked her out to a cruiser in front of cameras. Her expression tight-lipped, as darting was the last anyone in the neighborhood would see of her. She was charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, falsification of public records, criminal conspiracy, and abuse of fiduciary duty. We thought that would be the climax. It wasn't, because once investigators opened the books, they found something even worse. Over the last 5 years, the board had been funneling HOA dues into a separate LLC, a fake landscaping company registered under the name of Priscilla's cousin, who lived in another state. They'd been billing the HOA for beautification services that were never performed. Nearly $70,000 had disappeared. The entire board was implicated. A full audit revealed that the supposed contracted services were nothing more than shell payments. No employees. No equipment. Not even a valid business license. The county prosecutor issued indictments against 3 former board members for embezzlement and conspiracy to defraud homeowners. 2 of them took plea deals in exchange for testifying against Priscilla, who was now facing the possibility of federal charges. Leslie, ever methodical, helped us draft an emergency charter amendment that allowed residents to vote for full board dissolution. Within 72 hours, we had more than enough signatures. The emergency vote was held on a Sunday morning at the high school gymnasium. It wasn't even close. 93% voted to disband the existing HOA structure entirely. The new oversight committee, temporary but now fully empowered, voted to freeze all HOA accounts until a forensic accountant could be brought in. The city offered to help with the transition, assigning a municipal liaison to oversee the restructuring process. I was asked to chair the committee. I didn't want to, but I couldn't walk away, not when we were finally this close to making sure what happened to me and so many others could never happen again. The first thing we did was introduce transparency protocols. Every expenditure had to be published online, with scanned receipts and board member signatures. No more secret meetings. No more discretionary fines. Every homeowner got a copy of the new charter, along with a direct line to the liaison. Then came the restitution fund. Working with the DA's office, we came up with a plan to return the stolen funds using the assets seized from the fraudulent LLC. It wasn't perfect and it wouldn't cover everything, but it was a start. Homeowners who had been hit the hardest, those who lost thousands to fake liens or were forced into foreclosure proceedings, were prioritized. Letters of apology were drafted and signed by the interim board. Not because we were legally required to, but because it was the right thing to do. Weeks passed. Then months. The black paint on my house was finally removed by a professional team paid for by court order. They restored the original color, even improved the trim. But the real change wasn't cosmetic. It was in the way neighbors talked to each other now. People waved, asked questions, helped each other with landscaping. We held our first community block party in over 5 years. No permits, no fees, just a group of people reclaiming their neighborhood. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I sat on my front porch with Leslie and Henry. Kids were riding bikes down the street. Someone was grilling 2 houses down. Wind chimes clinked softly in the breeze. Henry tapped the armrest beside him. "So what now, Chair Zeller?" Leslie raised an eyebrow. "You planning a political run?" "Not a chance," I said. "But if another board ever tries to pull anything like this again, I'll be ready." They both raised their glasses. We didn't toast to victory. We toasted to vigilance. Because power unchecked always finds a way to creep back in. But this time, so would we. The county prosecutor's office had moved swiftly after the indictments. While the neighbors celebrated the dismantling of the corrupt HOA board and the sweeping reforms we'd pushed through, the real storm was still building in the background. 3 weeks after Priscilla's arrest, subpoenas hit the desks of over a dozen contractors, financial institutions, and even a local notary service. The investigation had expanded beyond just financial fraud. They were now looking into potential racketeering. The paper trail the investigators uncovered was staggering. There were forged lien documents filed under fake parcel numbers, retroactively altered meeting logs, and even a backdated HOA insurance policy filed under a fake board resolution. But the worst came when the forensic analyst discovered a second set of digital records stored on the confiscated server, password protected and hidden under a dummy folder labeled Old Budget Projections. Inside were dozens of internal memos, emails, and transfer logs that had never been disclosed in any meeting or financial report. One of the messages, dated over a year ago, detailed a decision to quietly target non-compliant homeowners. Anyone who had challenged the board's authority, refused to pay arbitrary fines, or even asked too many questions. The document laid out a plan to financially isolate them through strategic fee assessments, repeated citations, and manufactured delinquencies, what they casually referred to as containment procedures. That was no longer just fraud. It was systemic abuse. And it explained what happened to Mrs. Holloway. She'd lived at the far end of the cul-de-sac, a widow in her 70s who kept to herself. 2 years ago, she was evicted after the HOA claimed she owed nearly $10,000 in unpaid dues and legal fees. We'd all believed it was tragic, but legal. Now we knew the truth. Her file was one of the most detailed. It showed how the board had fabricated maintenance violations, issued citations without evidence, and doubled her dues using an unratified emergency assessment clause. She tried to fight it, but they'd buried her in threats of foreclosure and legal action until she gave up and left. The district attorney added elder abuse to the charges. At the next oversight committee meeting, the room was silent as Leslie read through the list of crimes the state was now pursuing. Mail fraud, tampering with legal documents, racketeering, elder financial exploitation, conspiracy to defraud, identity falsification, unauthorized practice of law. No one interrupted, not even Henry, who always had something to say. By that point, the former treasurer had already turned state's witness, handing over voice memos and recordings that included strategy sessions where board members discussed ways to phase out undesirable homeowners. One recording captured Priscilla laughing as she talked about how easy it was to manipulate the elderly into compliance through legal jargon and urgent-sounding letters. The courtroom looked different during the criminal trial. It was held in the Superior Courthouse downtown, and the gallery was packed residents, journalists, city officials. The press coverage had picked up steam once the elder abuse charges dropped. Even local politicians started paying attention. I was called to testify early. Leslie prepped me on the stand, reminding me to stick to what I knew firsthand. I recounted the day I found my home painted black, how I documented everything, how the board had fabricated meeting minutes and forged signatures. Then I was asked about the neighborhood's transformation, the petition drive, the temporary oversight committee, the vote to dissolve the board. When the defense tried to paint the whole thing as a misunderstanding, the prosecutor countered by playing one of the voice recordings aloud, the one where Priscilla called the house painting a warning shot to the rest of them. The jury didn't flinch. When the verdict finally landed, it hit like a thunderclap. Guilty on all counts. Priscilla was sentenced to 18 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 12. 2 other board members received 10 and 11 years, respectively. The treasurer, who had cooperated fully, received a reduced sentence and community service but was permanently barred from holding any future fiduciary role. But the judge didn't stop there. She issued a binding injunction that prohibited the reformation of any HOA within Oak Hollow without a full public referendum and legal oversight. Any future neighborhood governance would require annual audits by an independent third party funded by the city. And then the final blow, the newly reformed Oak Hollow Community Group, our transparent, volunteer-led neighborhood council, was awarded compensatory damages from the HOA's remaining assets. The funds would go to a community restitution fund for all affected homeowners. Leslie handled the fund's creation with clinical efficiency. Residents who'd paid fabricated fines were reimbursed. Those who'd faced illegal liens had their credit records cleared through legal filings. Mrs. Holloway, who had been living with her niece 2 counties over, was invited back. The community raised money to bring her home, and we helped her move into a newly renovated house just 2 doors down from mine. She didn't cry when she stepped onto her porch. She just stood there, one hand on the railing, and nodded to me. "I didn't think I'd see this street again," she said. "You were the first," I told her. "We just didn't know it at the time." We planted a memorial garden at the front of the neighborhood, not for anyone dead, but for the damage done. A place to remember what happens when power goes unchecked. The plaque read, "In honor of those who stood alone, until we stood together." The neighborhood changed after that, not just legally, but culturally. People were more involved. Committees were open to all. Budgets were reviewed publicly. Even the landscaping decisions were voted on in monthly meetings under a canopy at the park. One evening, as I was hauling recycling bins to the curb, Henry flagged me down. "City Council's drawing up new ordinances," he said. "They're using Oak Hollow as a model for HOA reform." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't think we'd end up as the blueprint." He chuckled. "Neither did I. But you turned a paint job into a revolution." "No," I said, watching a group of kids ride their bikes down the street. "We all did." Leslie didn't stay long after everything wrapped up. She'd gotten calls from other neighborhoods dealing with similar abuse and wanted to help them build what we'd built. Before she left, she handed me a sealed envelope. "Don't open it unless you're thinking of running for office," she said. "I've already got a job," I replied. "You'd be good at it," she said, stepping into her car. "Just don't let anyone paint your house again." We both laughed. I never opened the envelope. Still haven't. The black paint was gone. The house was back to its familiar colors. But something about it felt different now. Not just restored, earned. At night, the porch light cast longer shadows, but they didn't feel ominous anymore. Just real. Just honest. And in Oak Hollow, that finally meant something.